At Houston International Airport's Gate 34B, Elias Mercer moved slowly through the terminal, an aged man dwarfed by a threadbare coat stitched with foreign campaign patches. His gait was stiff, his hands unsteady, gripping a faded canvas bag with an airborne insignia. Few noticed him. A couple of teenagers whispered and snickered. Security eyed him as a potential inconvenience. As he paused by a bench to catch his breath, a TSA officer snapped, "Sir, you can't leave that there," as if Elias were a child who'd lost his way. He gave a slight nod, the kind that carried more apology than defiance. With care, he lifted the bag again, the weight pulling his shoulder into a familiar slump. The world bustled around him, business travelers shouting into phones, children darting toward vending machines, voices amplified by tile and steel. Elias moved through it like a ghost no one remembered summoning. A woman brushing past caught her scarf on a patch sewn to his coat. She glanced down. "MACVSOG?" she asked quietly, unsure if it meant anything. Elias only nodded. Her expression changed, but before she could speak, the crowd swept her away. He kept walking. He had no flight booked, no boarding pass, but he moved with purpose. His eyes scanned the monitors not for destinations but for something else, perhaps a name, or a time, long past. His watch was cracked, unmoving, set permanently to 4:47. He glanced at it, then at the gate ahead. A janitor, sweeping methodically, paused to give him space. Elias muttered a thank you. The janitor studied him a moment, as if sensing something unspoken, then resumed his rhythm. Elias arrived at Gate 34B and sat. His fingers trembled slightly as they unzipped the canvas bag, revealing an aged flag wrapped in plastic. He didn't look around, didn't seem to care who saw. He waited. The jungle swallowed everything, light, sound, time. Elias Mercer had once moved through it like a wraith, a shadow among trees, part of the terrain itself. In 1969, he was 23 and already on his third deployment. A paratrooper assigned to MACVSOG, he carried no name tags, no official orders. His missions went unrecorded. Across the fence, they called it, covert operations into Laos and Cambodia that didn't officially exist. The kind of duty that turned men into legends, or ghosts. He remembered that drop clearly. Their target was a suspected NVA logistics hub just across the border. Intel suggested a small outpost, lightly guarded. It wasn't. The LZ was hot before their boots hit ground. 2 helicopters went down. Fire tore through the treetops. Mercer and 3 others barely made it into the underbrush. Simmons was hit immediately. McCready screamed something about pulling back, but the jungle ate his voice. Mercer dragged Simmons for over a mile before the bleeding stopped, not because it slowed, but because Simmons was dead. The jungle closed in. No radio. No resupply. Every direction was hostile. Mercer led the 2 remaining men deeper, avoiding trails, sleeping in the roots of trees. The heat pressed down, thick and wet, until breathing felt like drowning. On day 4, McCready tripped a wire. The explosion left nothing but shreds. That left Mercer and Lee. By day 6, they were out of food and nearly out of water. Lee began to hallucinate. He wandered into the open and was taken. Mercer never saw him again. He was alone now. His boots wore through. The knife on his belt became more valuable than his rifle. He moved by instinct, never the same path twice, always uphill, into the wind, away from the sound of men. He stayed alive by scavenging rice from jungle caches and drinking from puddles. On day 11, he was captured. The prison camp was primitive. Bamboo cages, low fires, silence like a second guard. They beat him daily. He never gave his name. When they realized he wasn't breaking, they stopped asking questions. Just left him to rot. The only words spoken were commands: stand, kneel, eat, sleep. He carved notches into a post for each sunrise. He lost count at 40. Then came the monsoon. The storm hit in the night, tearing down half the compound. In the chaos, a section of fence gave way. Mercer ran barefoot, injured, bleeding. He didn't know where he was going, only away. He ran until he couldn't. Passed out beneath a palm. He woke up days later in a small stilt hut hidden in a thicket of banana trees. An old woman tended his wounds, spoke no English, never asked questions. She fed him broth, crushed herbs into paste, bound his feet in cloth. When he could walk, she handed him a book. A leather-bound journal. The name on the inside was not his, M. Darrow, Recon, 1953. Its pages were stained, written in code and shorthand, littered with names and grid references. Mercer added to it, 1 line per day. Coordinates. Names. Fallen friends. He kept the book close, like a lifeline. When he was found by a patrol near the Mekong, he weighed 120 pounds and could barely speak. Back in Saigon, a man in a gray suit debriefed him. "You'll forget all of this," the man said. "This didn't happen." Mercer asked about Lee. About Simmons. About McCready. "There's no record of your team," came the reply. "Your extraction never occurred. You're here under a medical evacuation for training injuries. Sign this." Mercer signed. No medals. No citations. A bronze star appeared in the mail 6 months later with a form letter. He kept it in a drawer and never spoke of it again. He returned to Baton Rouge, but nothing felt familiar. His sister had married. His friends were gone or changed. He tried working construction, but loud noises sent him to the ground. Crowds made him sweat. He moved west. He lived in small towns. Disappeared into deserts. Avoided holidays. The few times he visited a VA hospital, they told him his service records were incomplete. He gave up trying. The journal became his record. A litany of operations no one else remembered. Names scratched in careful print. Sergeant Lee, last seen near Chepone. Camp unknown, suspected NVA HQ. Witnessed, 2 U.S. uniforms, unknown fate. Years passed. Mercer grew older. His hands began to tremble. The VA said Parkinson's. He knew better. It was the weight of ghosts. The folded flag he carried had belonged to Simmons. He'd taken it from his pack. The knife had been Lee's. The journal, Darrow's and now his, was the only link between them all. He wrote letters to Congress. To the Pentagon. No one responded. Eventually, he stopped. But he never stopped writing in the journal. And now, he had one final mission. Not revenge. Not glory. Just memory. To make sure someone, anyone, remembered the names written in that book. He carried them still. At the security checkpoint, Elias Mercer moved forward inch by inch, one among many, though the glances he drew set him apart. His shoulders slumped not from fatigue but from decades of carrying names no one else remembered. The worn canvas bag with the airborne insignia bumped against his leg as he shuffled forward. His hand gripped the frayed strap tightly, as if letting go might somehow undo everything he had held onto for half a century. The TSA line crawled. A mother hushed a crying child. A man in a suit barked into a Bluetooth headset about missed connections. The fluorescent lighting above gave everything the pale sheen of unreality. Elias stared ahead, focusing on the metal detector, the X-ray belt, the inevitable confrontation. When he reached the conveyor belt, a young agent motioned for his bag. Elias hesitated. "Sir," the agent said, "please place your belongings on the belt." Elias gave a slight nod and lowered the canvas onto the rubber surface. The machine whirred to life. Seconds passed. Then, a dull clang. Something metallic had shifted inside the bag and struck the X-ray tunnel wall. The agent stiffened. Another TSA officer, older and more sure of himself, approached. "Sir, what's in the bag?" he asked. Elias looked down. "Memories," he said quietly. "I'm going to need you to open it." Elias's jaw tightened. "I'd rather not." A murmur began behind him. A woman with a stroller looked nervous. A man in gym clothes scoffed, "What's in there, old man?" "Explosives?" Another voice said, "Why don't they pull him aside already?" The older agent signaled to a supervisor. "We'll have to inspect this privately," the supervisor said. "Please follow me." As Elias reached for the bag, the zipper caught. The canvas, worn and fragile, tore slightly. The contents spilled across the floor. Gasps echoed around the checkpoint. A folded American flag, edges yellowed with time. A jungle survival knife with a cracked handle. A leather-bound journal marked MACVSOG. A rusted dog tag with a name partially rubbed away. One of the agents knelt, lifting the flag. "Careful," Elias said sharply. "That's not mine. That's Simmons's." The agent froze. The supervisor stepped back. Someone snapped a picture. Then another. Phones came out like drawn weapons, not in hostility, but confusion. People didn't know whether they were witnessing a tragedy or an inconvenience. "Is this real?" someone whispered. "What's MACVSOG?" asked a teenager behind the stanchions. "Is that military?" said another. Elias stood there, not defensive but exposed, like a fossil unearthed in a place too modern to comprehend it. The objects on the floor told a story, but it was in a language few could read. The journal, the knife, the flag, they weren't souvenirs. They were markers of a life erased from official memory. The TSA supervisor cleared his throat, suddenly unsure. Sir, we didn't mean." Elias knelt slowly and gathered the items, his fingers trembling but methodical. He rewrapped the flag, tucked the knife back into its sheath, slid the journal into its familiar pocket. He looked up at the crowd now watching him, some curious, some suspicious, others unsure what they were seeing. "I fought a war your books forgot," he said quietly. "And I'm not here to cause trouble. I just need to get to gate 34B. No one moved. Then someone laughed nervously. "Gate 34B? That flight's already boarded." "I'm not flying," Elias replied. The older TSA agent glanced at the insignia on Elias's sleeve. Something clicked. He stepped forward, touched the journal, and said, "Sir, are you?" But Elias was already moving. One hand on his bag, the other pressed to the small of his back, where the knife had once lived on missions across rivers that didn't exist on maps. His boots, old jungle-issued, thudded against the tile as he walked back into the terminal, leaving behind silence and stillness. Behind him, the TSA agents stared at one another. "MACVSOG," the older one muttered. "I thought that was a myth." "No," the supervisor said softly. "I think we just made a mistake." Elias found a bench near a vending machine and sat, rolling the journal between his palms. Around him, the airport resumed its rhythm. An announcement about a delayed flight. Children crying. The smell of reheated food and jet fuel in the vents. The world moved on as it always did, uninterested in what didn't fit into boarding times and ticket classes. He opened the journal to a page near the middle. A name. Lee, S., presumed captured, last seen 14 degrees 36 minutes north 106 degrees 12 minutes east. He traced the letters with his fingertip. Then another entry, M. Darrow, lost 1953, journal found under hut near border. He had written it himself, decades ago. "Still with me," he said, not looking up. A boy nearby, no older than 10, peered over his tablet. "Hey, mister," he said. "Were you in the army?" Elias didn't smile, but his tone softened. "Something like that." "My grandpa was in the Marines," the boy said. "He has medals and stuff." Elias nodded. "That's good. Your grandpa's a hero." The boy grinned and ran back to his mother. Elias stared out toward the gates, as if expecting something, or someone, to walk through the crowd. For a moment, he thought he saw McCready, or Simmons, or even Lee. But they faded into the crowd as quickly as they came. Phantoms woven into the noise of the present. In the corner of the terminal, a group of men in uniform stood near a coffee kiosk. Naval dress blues. Laughing softly. One of them, a tall, solidly built officer, glanced in Elias's direction, his gaze catching on the patch just visible beneath the edge of Elias's coat sleeve. His laughter stopped. The insignia was old. Not common. Not publicly acknowledged. A snake wrapped around a dagger, wings flared behind it. The officer leaned forward. "Hold up," he muttered to his team. "Do you see that? That patch. That can't be." His teammate sipped his coffee. "What is it?" The officer stared harder. "It's MACVSOG. That's real?" The teammate shrugged. "I thought that was some Cold War ghost unit." The officer didn't answer. His jaw clenched. He took a step forward, eyes narrowing. "Wait here," he said, walking toward Elias Mercer, who sat unmoved, watching, waiting, remembering. Lieutenant Daniel Ramirez moved through the crowd like a man in a fog, eyes locked on the old soldier seated near the vending machines. His SEAL teammates watched him go, puzzled, until one muttered, "What the hell's gotten into him?" But Ramirez didn't answer. He hadn't heard them. Something deeper had seized his attention, something trained into him, then buried under layers of protocol and time. The patch. That impossible patch. He stopped 5 feet away. The man hadn't moved. He sat with one hand resting over a faded leather journal, eyes half closed, chin tipped toward the tarmac. Ramirez could now clearly make out the embroidery on the coat sleeve, a snake coiled around a dagger, wings flared behind. Faded, worn, but unmistakable. It didn't exist. Not officially. Not publicly. Not since Vietnam. And yet here it was, right in front of him. "Sir?" Ramirez said, gently. The old man blinked but didn't look up. "I don't want to interrupt you, but, is your name Mercer?" Silence. Ramirez took a cautious step forward. "I trained under instructors who told your story. Operation Lotus Ghost. Cambodia, 1970. You were listed MIA, presumed dead." Elias Mercer finally turned his head. Slowly. His gaze met Ramirez's, sharp and evaluating, like the stare of someone who hadn't forgotten how to see a threat before it announced itself. He didn't answer, just studied the lieutenant's face. "They said you called fire on your own position to save a recon team pinned by NVA armor," Ramirez said. "Survived a month evading capture. Then disappeared. No formal debrief. No discharge papers. Just, gone." Elias's voice was gravel dragged across concrete. "I didn't disappear. They told me to." Ramirez nodded once, solemn. "You saved Lieutenant Harlan's team. That man trained my instructors. Your mission reports became doctrine in the SEALs. We built escape and evasion procedures around what you did." Elias didn't respond. He simply stared, as if waiting to wake up from something. Behind Ramirez, the other SEALs began to notice. One by one, they drifted closer. 4 in total. Their patches bore different commands, but their gait and bearing matched, a pack recognizing one of its own. He looks like hell, one of them whispered. Wouldn't you, after 30 years in the wind, said another. Ramirez dropped to a knee. The others followed. Passengers paused. A family trying to wrangle 3 kids stopped short. A pilot waiting on his gate double-taked. The crowd quieted. Phones lowered. Noise dwindled into reverent hush. Elias looked down at the 4 kneeling men. His fingers twitched on the journal. One word left his lips, why? Because you weren't forgotten, Ramirez said. Because we're standing on your bones, sir. I was just a name they erased. Maybe, one SEAL said. But your choices taught us how to come home. From across the terminal, the TSA supervisor reappeared. His expression shifted from confusion to discomfort. He turned to leave, but then stopped as the Delta gate attendant approached. Her eyes were wide, and her voice shook slightly when she spoke. Sir, she said to Elias, we'd be honored to have you board now. We've arranged for priority seating. If you'd accept it. Elias blinked, caught between decades. I didn't buy a ticket. You don't need one today, she said. One was just made available. A woman in first class had already stepped forward, wordless, offering her boarding pass to the gate agent. When Elias looked at her, she simply nodded and said, I think you deserve the window seat more than I do. Elias hesitated. The SEALs helped him stand. Passengers made room, forming a quiet corridor down the terminal. Each step Elias took was deliberate, careful, like walking through the jungle again, but this time without fear of ambush. Instead of gunfire, there was silence. Instead of enemies, there were strangers who didn't look away. The gate agent scanned the boarding pass, then turned to the pilot standing nearby. The pilot saluted. We're honored to carry you today, Master Sergeant Mercer. A murmur ran through the boarding area. Master Sergeant. The rank had gone unspoken until then, buried beneath decades of silence. But now it rang clear, undeniable. Ramirez and his team followed behind, maintaining distance but not reverence. As Elias stepped into the jetway, he paused and looked back. Who told you about Lotus Ghost? He asked. My instructor. Commander Harlan. Said he owed his life to you. Said you were the toughest bastard he ever met. Elias's lips twitched. A fragment of a smile. Then he nodded once. Tell him I still have his map, he muttered. Then turned and disappeared into the plane. Back in the terminal, silence lingered for another breath or two. Then the noise resumed, calls for boarding groups, the crackle of intercoms, the distant wail of a toddler denied a cookie. But a seed had been planted. A flight attendant took a photo of the kneeling SEALs. A father whispered to his son, that man's a hero. A TSA agent pulled out his phone and looked up MACVSOG. Another Googled Operation Lotus Ghost. The legend, once buried under bureaucracy and black ink, had stirred again. In the jetway, Ramirez stood for a moment longer, looking at the gate number. 34B. He'd never forget it. And neither would anyone who'd been there that day. The air in the jet's cabin felt too clean, too cold, too far from jungle rot and rain. Elias sank into the first-class seat with stiff, deliberate movements. The flag sat folded across his knees. One hand rested lightly atop it, as if anchoring something fragile in place. Across from him, passengers who had already boarded stared with puzzled curiosity. But then, one by one, the expressions shifted, uncertainty fading into solemn understanding. Lieutenant Ramirez stood nearby, eyes scanning the cabin. Sir, he said softly, if you need anything, anything at all, we've got you. Elias looked up, and for a second the old lines on his face softened. I need people to stop forgetting, he said. That's all. Ramirez gave a quiet nod and stepped back, joining his team along the forward galley wall. The 4 SEALs stood at attention, not by command, but by choice. They didn't take their seats. They didn't speak. They simply stood guard. The flight crew huddled briefly. Then the captain returned. His voice was calm, reverent. "We'll hold the flight a few more minutes," he said to the attendants. "No delay worth more than what's happening now." In row 2, a woman lowered her phone. She had been filming discreetly but now let it drop to her lap. Across the aisle, a man removed his headphones, blinking as if surfacing from a different world. Even the children sensed something unspoken and quieted. Elias adjusted his coat. The MACVSOG patch caught the overhead light. A steward stepped forward and offered him water. Elias took it with a grateful nod, then set it aside untouched. Instead, he reached into the canvas bag and pulled out the journal. He turned to a marked page. A name. Lee, Sergeant Stephen. A note beneath it. Presumed captured, no remains recovered. The coordinates were scrawled next to it, remembered from a trembling memory, not a GPS readout. He stared at the page, his finger tapping once, then again. As if keeping time for a ghost. Ramirez leaned slightly forward, voice low. "Sir, permission to ask, what's that journal contain?" Elias didn't look up. Everything they didn't want on paper. He flipped a few more pages. Each was the same: names, unit numbers, call signs, map grids. Sometimes a final quote. Sometimes a single word. Burned. Vanished. Extracted. Others had only an X over them, lives with no known ending, just silence. The lieutenant's voice was quiet. "You kept all that for them?" "No," Elias said. "I kept it because no one else would." Word of what was happening had reached the rest of the terminal. More service members now stood near gate 34B, some in dress, others in civilian clothes with quietly visible dog tags. Airport staff began directing passengers around the gathering without question. Back on the plane, the captain made an announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we take off, we'd like to take a moment to recognize a distinguished passenger traveling with us today, Master Sergeant Elias Mercer, Vietnam veteran and member of a unit whose history is only now being understood. We're honored to have him aboard." A hush fell over the cabin. Then, slowly, the passengers began to clap. Not loudly. Not performatively. A quiet, rhythmic applause that rolled gently from row to row like distant thunder. Elias didn't react at first. He simply closed the journal and placed it on the folded flag in his lap. Then he looked up. His voice, when it came, was low but strong. "They were better than me," he said. "I just lived longer." The clapping slowed. People didn't quite know how to respond. Ramirez moved closer. "You carried them farther than any of us ever could," he said. "What you remembered, changed how we fight. How we survive." Elias met his gaze. "Then remember it right. Don't clean it up. Don't turn it into a myth." Ramirez nodded. "Never, sir." A message appeared on the gate agent's monitor. The woman who had given Elias her seat was waiting to board another flight now. She declined the airline's offer of compensation. "Tell the old man it was my father's flag too," she'd said. And he would have done the same. The flight attendants finished final checks. The captain returned to the cockpit. The jet taxied slowly toward the runway. As the engines roared, Elias looked out the window. He could see the edge of the airfield, the glint of sun on metal, the wavering haze of heat over concrete. For a moment, his eyes seemed to see something else, the wide, endless green of a Laotian treetop, the rhythmic chop of a Huey's rotors, the sudden hiss of incoming fire. He blinked once. Then again. The image faded. The plane lifted, leaving the ground behind. Ramirez remained standing until the aircraft leveled out. Then he took the seat across the aisle. Not to guard. Not to hover. Just to be present. You said they shelved you, he said after a long silence. Sir, we didn't know. We thought it was just a ghost story. You were a ghost story. Elias smiled faintly. Then I guess I'm haunting the right place. Ramirez chuckled softly. You're more than that. You're the reason doctrine changed. You're the reason we're briefed on jungle survival, escape maps, psychological conditioning. They used your reports. They just scrubbed your name. They scrub names, Elias said, but not actions. That's what sticks. Would you want it on the record now? Would you talk? Elias looked at him for a long time. Then shook his head. Not about me. About them. If someone's telling it, tell it about them. I was just the carrier. The journal lay between them, its leather worn smooth at the edges. Ramirez reached toward it but paused. May I? Elias hesitated. Then nodded once. Ramirez opened it gently, flipping through the scrawled entries. Jesus, he whispered. This is a tomb. A cathedral. It's a ledger, Elias corrected. A debt unpaid. He took it back and tucked it under his arm. The plane flew on, silent but for the hum of engines. No one disturbed him for the rest of the flight. Not for photos. Not for autographs. The SEALs kept their vigil, and passengers watched with the kind of respect not taught, only felt. By the time wheels touched down, the world outside had already begun to shift. People were talking. Videos circulated. Old man with secret unit journal. Vet finally recognized. Legend found at Houston airport. Articles spun out of guesses. No one had the full picture. But for those on the plane, none of it mattered. They had seen it with their own eyes. The morning after the flight, the story was everywhere. Not in headlines, not yet, but spreading through whispers, video snippets, and quiet reposts. Vietnam ghost found alive. Unit with no name. The man with the flag and the book. But Elias Mercer had already moved on. He stepped off the curb outside the airport with no ceremony. Refused every offer of transport, every hand extended with too much pity in the fingers. The SEALs had asked for contact info. Ramirez had even slipped him a secure radio. Channel 7, he'd said. But Elias hadn't touched it. It rested deep in the canvas bag beside the knife and the journal. He walked alone, through a city that seemed to forget him even as it tried to remember. Houston had changed. The streets no longer matched the ones from his youth. The cafe where he and Simmons used to meet before deployment had become a vape store. The bar where he drank his first beer back from Laos was a bank now. The whole damn place smelled like new asphalt and energy drinks. But memory didn't care about remodels. Memory lived in footprints, not signs. He moved east, slow but steady, toward a narrow lot pressed between warehouses. The fence was half rusted, the grass brittle. But the small stone plaque embedded in the ground was still there. For those who were lost and never found. It wasn't official. A group of veterans had paid for it in '82, tucked it here when the city wouldn't permit a formal memorial. Elias had attended the midnight ceremony and said nothing. He knelt now, ran a hand across the names etched in faint grooves. He whispered each one under his breath, names from his unit, and those no one ever carved into monuments. He opened the journal and pulled a pen from inside his coat. A name had surfaced in his mind on the plane, and he hadn't written it yet. Harris, T., shot during extract, presumed drowned. He closed the book slowly. Across the street, someone snapped a photo. Elias didn't look up. He'd seen it happen twice already this morning, strangers unsure of who he was but certain they should remember him. Let them. That afternoon, a request arrived at the Pentagon, unofficial, unmarked, routed through channels no longer labeled. It came from someone who'd been on the Delta flight. A civilian who'd watched the SEALs kneel and the crowd stand back. The message was short. Subject, Mercer, Elias, recognition recommended. The system stalled. Mercer's name triggered nothing. No current record. No discharge. No confirmed missions. Nothing but a bronze star logged under a general, combat valor, tag. But then another message came. And another. Lieutenant Daniel Ramirez filed a personal report. Attached were scans of 3 journal pages, coordinates, names, and notations. To be verified, he wrote, but the detail exceeds common fabrication. Recommend formal review. Within 24 hours, 2 veterans organizations had picked up the trail. Within 48, an archived photo of a MACVSOG team from 1970 began to circulate, 6 men in shadow, standing at the edge of a clearing, one of them bearing a patch just like Elias's. By the 3rd day, a Pentagon staffer found a file labeled SOG/D Section 1970, Eyes Only. Redacted. Scarred by water damage. But a name was visible on the edge of a folded page, Mercer, E, active. And still, Elias kept walking. He visited 4 more places in 3 days, a wall in a city park where someone had once carved, Sergeant Lee is not forgotten. A gas station where an old man in a trucker hat handed Elias a folded photograph and said, I saw you at Da Nang. Thought you were dead. A school library that still had a Vietnam War book with a footnote scribbled in pen, SOG weren't ghosts. We just didn't know their names. At each place, Elias added a note to the journal. A location. A conversation. A memory returned to its rightful shelf. The SEALs found him on the 5th day. Not because he called. But because Ramirez had guessed where he'd go. The cafe that wasn't a cafe. The memorial with no address. They approached from a distance, no formation, no display. Just men who understood that silence was sometimes a language more sacred than words. Elias sat on a bench facing a pond. The flag was in his lap. The journal was open, but he wasn't writing. You're hard to find, Ramirez said gently. Elias didn't answer. We're putting your name back in the book, Ramirez continued. You don't have to be there when it happens, but we thought you should know. Elias's fingers tapped once on the journal's cover. It's not about the name. It's about the weight. Ramirez sat beside him. Then let us carry it now. There was a long pause. Wind rustled the nearby trees. The water shimmered with late afternoon sun. Elias closed the journal. Handed it to Ramirez. Then don't let them edit it. I won't. The other SEALs sat nearby. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. One brought coffee. Another laid down a patch beside Elias, a unit crest with a date. 2023, their own. There now. Elias smiled faintly. You boys are loud, he said. But you're listening. That's more than I expected. We'll do more than listen, Ramirez said. We'll tell it. The whole thing. Not the movie version. The real one. Then tell it about them. Simmons. Lee. Darrow. All of them. I will, sir. Elias stood. Slowly, stiffly, but without help. Then I've got nothing left to add, he said. He turned toward the street. A city bus hissed to a stop nearby. He stepped on, paid in exact change, and didn't look back. The SEALs remained on the bench long after the bus was gone. Ramirez still held the journal in his lap. One of the younger men asked, "What do we do with it now?" "We read it," Ramirez said. "Then we remember it. Then we make sure no one ever forgets it again." And they did. That night, a copy of the journal was scanned and sent to a secure military archive. A report was drafted. A citation was prepared. But Elias Mercer was never seen at the ceremony. He remembered.